You could use a lot of words to describe true Aussie. Genuine, passionate, trustworthy. But our name says it all. True Aussie. Truly Australian. With wide open spaces, rich and protected pastures, Australia is the ideal home for growing happy and healthy animals year-round. There's peace of mind knowing that Australian beef is unbeatable on safety and quality. To put it simply, there's pure enjoyment in every bite of Australian beef. Now the entire world can taste the greatest beef produced on the planet. Our food, your table. Truly Australian.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to present at Match Meat Series. My name is Edwina Clowes and I'm the Manager of Sustainability Frameworks and Stakeholders at Meat and Livestock Australia. And my co-presenter is Jenny O'Sullivan. Jenny's a beef and sheep producer from Gippslands in Victoria and a passionate advocate for sustainable agriculture. We've been asked today to present on sustainability and carbon neutrality in the Australian livestock industry. And I'd like to focus on three key programs that the Australian livestock industry and our research, development and marketing body, Meat and Livestock Australia, are focused on. And they are the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, the Australian Sheep Sustainability Framework, and CN30, which is the Australian livestock industry's commitment to becoming carbon neutral by 2030. And my co-presenter, Jenny, she'll be speaking on sustainability and carbon neutrality and what it means on farm, the tools and the practices that she and her husband, Paul, have trialled and tested, what's worked, what hasn't, what they've adopted, what that's meant in terms of sustainability, productivity and profitability on farm, the market opportunities they're looking at, and what other market opportunities they're currently benefiting from. So sustainability is a very, very big, broad topic. It covers the globe. It covers all industries, all sectors, all countries, all continents. The Australian livestock industry is absolutely committed to Australia's contribution to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And sustainability for us, for the Australian livestock industry, means the production and the processing of our livestock and red meat in a way that's environmentally, economically and socially sustainable for our people, for our animals and for our natural resources today and for future generations. And it's those three threads of sustainability, the economic, the environmental and the social, that are intrinsically linked. Because you can't be economically sustainable if the practices you want your producers to enforce will send them bankrupt. And you can't be socially sustainable if we can't provide enough food to support and feed our customers and consumers in our community. And you can't be environmentally sustainable if the practices that you put in place will destroy our planet and our natural resources. Our country, Australia, is the biggest country, the biggest driest country, the biggest driest continent in the world. It's an extensively arid and semi-arid landscape of variable climates and at times very extreme conditions of weather and drought. In fact, 81% of Australia is broadly defined as rangelands, and our livestock producers are the custodians of over half of our land mass. So climate change is the biggest individual driver for our livestock industry and for production variability in Australia. And our industry has to adapt its management practices to be able to reflect these dramatically changing climatic conditions. And this comes at a time when our rangeland systems are becoming increasingly important as a food source and a potentially powerful carbon sequestration sink. But the Australian livestock industry has proven that it's resilient and it's responsive to our customers and our investors. We've radically improved the eating quality and the tenderness of our product, and that's been the result of Meat Standards Australia's objective grading system And that's improved the prospects for our industry. It's created stable demand and stable prices for our industry. More recently, we've radically improved the flavour and the taste of our product, and that's been through our commitment to our grass-fed rangelands production systems and our really careful management practices. And so now we've set some really, really ambitious targets between now and 2030, and they are to double the value of Australian red meat sales and to be the trusted source of the highest quality protein by 2030, to be recognised as world leaders in animal health, welfare and production practices, to be carbon neutral, our livestock industry to be carbon neutral by 2030, and to be world leaders in agricultural, environmental management and stewardship practices. And the backbone of sustainability for the Australian livestock industry are our two frameworks, the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework and the Australian Sheep Sustainability Framework. These frameworks have been developed and driven and led by industry to meet our changing expectations of our customers and our investors around sustainability to meet future market opportunities. And those main areas that we are focusing on are minimising invasive animal husbandry practices and improving animal welfare, carbon neutrality, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and renewable energy focus, and natural capital, biodiversity, and improving our drought and risk resilience. And these frameworks have been informed by the highest standards and principles around materiality, around stakeholder inclusiveness, and stakeholder responsiveness. And this gives them the absolute rigour and integrity that makes them absolutely defensible. So the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, as you'll see, is centred around the four key themes of animal welfare, economic resilience, environmental stewardship, and people and community. And within those four themes, we have identified 10 priority areas, 23 priority issues, and 50 metrics to track the progress against the standards and the data. The Sheep Sustainability Framework too has four key themes, and they are caring for our sheep, enhancing our environment and climate, again, looking after our people and our communities and our customers, and again, securing and ensuring sustainable financial stability for our industry. And again, within the sheep framework, you'll see that we've captured 9 focus areas, 21 priority issues, and 58 indicators to track progress against standards and metrics. And so the role of these frameworks is to monitor, to measure and report on industry progress against these sustainability priorities. They're not there to regulate, they're not there to set goals or policies or targets, and they're not there to prescribe particular auditing or certification practices for businesses. But rather, by connecting the whole of the supply chain to each other and to connecting to new business and market opportunities, the frameworks will enable industry and industry itself to drive performance and progress rather than having it mandated against it. So we're achieving some pretty big goals, we believe. The Australian Sheep Sustainability Framework is scheduled to be officially launched on the 21st of April this year, and this is the first sheep meat and wool sustainability framework globally. So exciting news for our Australian industry. The Beef Sustainability Framework, it's now in its 5th consecutive year, and it's made some substantial progress against a number of its milestones. We're free essentially of all the major world exotic diseases. The livestock industry and red meat industry, as I've mentioned, reduced its emissions of greenhouse gas emissions by 56.7% since baseline year 2005. And we've made some progress and movement away from the aversive animal husbandry practices by investing in new science and technology and genetics when it becomes available, and increasingly increasing the uptake of pain relief by producers when undertaking animal husbandry practices. Our new exciting piece of technology is the balance of grass and tree cover dashboard. This will enable producers for the first time to accurately measure the changes in woodland and grass cover at a regional and individual property level, so protecting their biodiversity. So climate remains the biggest individual driver for our livestock industry and production variability, and managing climate change is absolutely critical. Much of our land mass, as I've mentioned, can't sustain any other food production systems, and it's becoming increasingly important and capable of being able to sequester significant amounts of carbon in our soils and vegetation, and in turn offsetting national greenhouse gas emissions. And the livestock industry, we believe, has already made some significant progress. Agriculture is achieving the most significant reductions of any emissions of any industry in Australia. And the livestock industry is making the biggest contributions to emissions reductions of any agricultural industry. So CN30 is our most critical piece of work for our industry and for our nation. And the good thing is that our CSRO modelling is demonstrating that we can maintain our livestock numbers and keep to our commitment of doubling the value of our red meat sales, while still supporting our goal and target of reducing emissions to neutral by 2030. And this is all within management practices and technology that we currently have available for adoption or is under investigation. So to go the next step to achieve neutrality by 2030, MLA has invested in some big science and technology. These include red Asparagopsis and 3-NOP that once commercialised and rolled out across our extensive rangeland system are capable of reducing emissions by as much as 90%. MLA has already also developed the CN30 roadmap. So this is to enable producers to capitalise on these emerging carbon markets. And the roadmap sets out for industry and for enterprise level the pathways and the tools and the practices they need to reduce their emissions, to capture carbon storage, and the tools that enable producers to be able to calculate their emissions and their sequestration. So I hope that gives you a really brief synopsis of what the Australian livestock industry is doing, our pathway to becoming sustainable and carbon neutral, our commitments to achieving that, and the exciting progress that we believe we've made to date. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and it really gives me great pleasure now to hand you over to our co-presenter, Jenny O'Sullivan, who's going to be talking about carbon neutrality and sustainability at a farm level and what it means. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Edwina. Yes, I wanted to give you the perspective from the farmer and what all this means. So we're farming in South Gippsland in Victoria. So we're almost the southernmost point of mainland Australia. We've got 664 hectares. We're probably grazing about 85% of that, and we have 15% set aside either for bush, shade and shelter, or houses and sheds and things. We run about 2,200 ewes that lamb down and about 450 breeding cows. The meat that we produce from our farm each year feeds about 10,500 people if you look at the average consumption. And for us, most of our meat is actually sold domestically, but for Australia, 70% of the meat that's produced actually goes export. And so our export markets are very, very important to us as an industry. So we think about animal welfare every single day. It's actually critical for us that our animals are well fed, they've got food, clean water, that they're safe, have a low stress environment, and they're healthy and happy. So you can see in that bottom photo there, they're our ewes that are lambing. We lamb in August. We scan all our ewes when they're pregnant to see whether they're having singles, twins, or triplets. And then we divide them into different mobs so that we can put them on pastures to feed them appropriately for their pregnancy. So you can see in that paddock, there's lots of twins. So this is the twin mob. And we will on average get about 150% lambing percentage from our ewes. And you can see the cattle up the top there. We're calving cattle. We get about 95% calves for the cows that we have. Again, both the cows and the sheep are raised in a very natural environment where they're calving in a paddock with their peers. It's a very safe environment. With the cattle, we'll check them twice a day. Paul drives around to check that there's no cows having any problems. and they're calving out in the paddock in a very natural environment. It's interesting stress. Edwina mentioned Meat Standards Australia, or MSA, and Australia's been using that as a quality system for 20 years now, and it's been really valuable so that through the whole supply chain, we can know what it takes to produce a quality animal. I mean, if you want a Rolls Royce, or if you want a top quality steak, every step of the way, we have to do the right thing to ensure quality. So it comes to us with the genetics that we're selecting, the nutrition that we feed our animals on farm, the stress on farm, how they're processed, and then how that meat's stored and handled. And so that we're making sure that everyone in the supply chain is doing the absolute best that we can deliver a really quality product to you. And you can see Paul there holding some clover in his hand, which is a legume, which is again very, very important. The legumes actually produce nitrogen in the soil, so that will help the grass grow. They're also very high protein. So again, for young stock or stock with high requirements, it makes an enormous difference. And through the north of the state, there's been a lot of research in different legumes that they can grow. And again, the legumes can have an impact on reducing carbon emissions because they are more nutritious for the animals. It's interesting as far as carbon emissions, if we could stop the methane, it's actually animals are burping and it's an inefficiency. It actually happens naturally with ruminants. But if we can stop that, and that carbon actually goes towards growth, we could turn off our calves probably about 2 months earlier. So there's pretty exciting, this opportunity with the research that we're doing, that we can actually produce our animals more efficiently and actually have a less environmental impact. So that's what we're trying to do, and there's some really exciting opportunities coming from the research. As far as the environment, we've got to consider the land, the soil, the water, and the air. So you can see in the bottom left there, that's my daughter 20 years ago in a gully on the farm. We don't have any permanent waterways, but in the winter when it floods, we have an enormous amount of water that moves through the landscape. And it was taking the soil and eroding this gully. So what we did is we fenced it off, and you can see up the top there with the beautiful trees providing beautiful shelter for our sheep. By fencing that off and fencing with remnants, we've created fantastic shelter for our livestock. And I went into the creek just a few weeks ago to take this photo on the right. And you can see we've got lots of eucalyptus, which is a fantastic habitat for our koalas and our possums. And I was very excited to see that fern, which is naturally regenerated and will grow into a beautiful tree fern. So by setting aside these areas where the water can erode, we actually create benefits for our animals as well. So it's a win-win for nature and productivity. Water quality is really, really important. And it's interesting, with the changing climate, we've actually invested in quite a lot of money in water infrastructure around the farm to ensure that we're waterproof, even if we have series of droughts, that we can actually still supply water to our animals. And as far as air pollution, well, that's all about the work with methane and carbon emissions. So one of the other things we really value is the biodiversity. We are lucky that was a significant amount of bush on our farm, and we have fenced that off to protect it. You can see on the top left there with some of our family are standing in these grass trees that are absolutely magnificent. They grow 1 centimetre a year, and we've got some that are over 3 metres tall. So really valuable vegetation that we want to protect. And you can see this little koala down the bottom here. When we're planting trees, we're always planting for the wildlife, and we're planting for the wildlife that they can thrive. This little koala was just in our yard the other day. So they're still very active, very healthy, and lots of kangaroos as well. So it's interesting with climate change, it is affecting us in how we farm, and we've had to adapt. So we've changed our time of lambing because we were getting drier summers, and it was impacting on how finished the animals were. So we've brought the lambing forwards. Certainly right across Australia, there's perhaps been a lot of adaptation as the seasons change and the rainfall changes. And we need good science to do that. We need best practice to do that. And we're lucky that we have a feedlot industry as well, that when you are out of feed on the farm, you need to sell your stock. They can go into feedlots to make sure they have a balanced nutritious diet, and we can actually produce a really quality product. And we've got about 24.7 million livestock across Australia, and about 4.5% of cattle are in feedlots at any one time. And that's the finishing process to produce the top quality product. It's interesting to look at how large a country Australia is. On the left, you've got Europe. On the right, you've got Asia. And it's a very, very big country and very, very different environments that we will see up in the north, the hot and dry, and down south where we are very wet. So for farmers, we need to look at what sustainability is and embrace best practice. But what's best practice for us in the south might be quite different in the north. And that's where it's so important that we've got good research, good information for farmers about what best practice is. The industry, I think last year invested about 12.3 million in environmental management research and about 14.5 million in animal welfare. So we really are aiming to be the best in the world. We want really good quality systems to ensure we can produce the best quality product with the lightest footprint. And we really want it as an industry to be sustainable. It needs to be profitable for our farmers, but we need to produce a quality product for our customers. So it really is all in the eating. And I think that's what you're looking for too for your customers. So you can rest assured if you're buying Australian beef or lamb, you know that we have good systems underpinning us. We are aiming to be the world's best with everything that we do. If you want to have a look at the beef sustainability framework, that's the website there. The sheep sustainability framework website will be launched once it's launched later this year. So thank you for listening to us, Edwina, and I'd love to take any questions. Thank you.
When people ask me about what does sustainability mean, to me there's three assets. There's the financial sustainability, the environmental side, and also the people side. I think the profitability comes about because we've got healthy, well-performing animals. That's what drives the bottom line. And so it's in our best interest to look after the animals, feed them well, and that's what I think about all the time.
Paul and I came back to farm in partnership with Mum and Dad in 1991, and we were quite concerned with the soil that was moving on the farm. So one of the first things Paul and I did was to fence out the creek and to revegetate it. It was quite important to get native trees and grasses back so that we can keep the soil in place. And we actually have seen that the creek rebuild, and we actually now don't have big gullies, and we've got an amazing shade and shelter for our livestock and biodiversity for the wildlife. We've either preserved and protected native vegetation, and we've got some fantastic different types of vegetation, and we're also having a pretty extensive tree planting with shelter belts in our paddocks, because we see that shade and shelter for livestock is very important, and we also see preserving the bush that we have is really important for the biodiversity because it's pretty precious.
It's a unique business. We love being on the farm. We love the animals. That's why we do it. We love the environment we work in. I tell all my friends in the city I've got the best office that anyone could imagine, really, when you get outside. Yeah, no, it's what we do. We love it.
Oh, what a great video. I want to travel to Australia now. I'd like to welcome Edwina and Jenny back on. Please turn on your cameras. Wonderful presentation on the livestock in Australia. Thank you so much, guys. And great to have you here. We got a couple of questions from the audience. And so one, which basically pertains to tracking of sustainability measures taken by MLA and your farmers. I know there's a lot of technology nowadays involved. So I think one question would be like, how can buyers track your efforts and your progress in the sustainability field?
Thanks, Carl. To me, the best thing would be to look at our frameworks that we're updating every year. We're getting a lot of information that's developed sort of outside the industry that's very factual. So I put the website up for the beef sustainability framework, and the sheep framework will be up soon. So all the information we're gathering, objectively verified fact is there. So I think that would be the best starting point. Don't you think, Edwina?
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny. And I think, Meat and Livestock Australia, our integrity systems because we are such an export-dependent nation, that every animal is tracked from farm right through to export destination. So there is an identification for each producer, an identification for each animal, and there are livestock production assurance, quality assurance programs that must be enforced and abided by producers to be able to get access to those markets. So that's the first step. The frameworks, as Jen mentioned, they're absolutely embedded in rigour. Everything within the frameworks is against best international and national practice. So those standards are driven within the frameworks. The frameworks are absolutely transparent, and within the frameworks there is that commitment to track progress year on, year out, and report to that. All that information, as Jen mentioned, is available on the websites.
The other thing, Edwina, MLA has a fantastic website, and all the research is there. So the research data is fascinating, but they also have a terrific one called Good Meat, and a lot of the stories, and that's being updated all the time. So if you're wanting something more relevant, and certainly as producers, we connect into that to get the latest information and research. And you can subscribe, I think, to the research updates, can't you, Edwina, if you're interested too, and you can find that on the MLA website.
There's lots of different material. Good Meat's very much focused on the actual consumer, Rare Medium focused on the actual wholesale industry. You can actually subscribe to a number of subscriptions like Friday Feedback, the Feedback magazine, lots of areas where you can get easy access to information, and the website itself, mla.com.au, you can dive into there and focus on particular areas of research that we're doing across sustainability, climate change, adoption practices, animal husbandry, animal welfare, right across the scope. Okay,
great. I think there's a follow-up question here, and it basically, I understand you're working since 5 years, I mean, much longer on it already in sustainability, but the framework itself is about 5 years old now. So what are the next major steps in becoming carbon neutral by 2030? So what are the major hurdles that you'll see, or maybe the major steps that you implement soon in order to achieve?
Edwina is probably best talking from an MLA point of view, but as a farmer, there's an enormous amount of research going on that we can quantify how we measure it and monitor it. And there's been a great program that was rolled out, and I was part of the pilot, where we could actually measure our emissions and look at opportunities to offset. We're looking at some more science in how you offset that, particularly the sequestration. It's quite limited even globally what we have for sequestration, and particularly how we monitor those changes over time. So MLA is investing in quite a bit of work across the whole range, but it's the whole supply chain we need to look at. So I'm, of course, looking at a producer. We've also got the processors, and they've been doing an enormous amount in that space as well, and it has an impact on their costs, particularly energy costs. And then we've got transport. But really, I think Edwina might talk a little bit more around that whole carbon program.
It's a really rapidly evolving space, and we're sort of basically capturing the technology and the science that we have and utilising that, but that science and technology is rapidly evolving. So I guess the two areas are on carbon emissions and trying to reduce them, and carbon storage and sequestration. So emissions, MLA's done a lot of work in terms of productivity and genetics, improving the genetics of our livestock so that they're capable of being turned off at a much faster rate, looking at low methane producing genetics, and the much more efficient conversion of feed into meat. So that's the real area there. We've got a lot of work that's happened in terms of, I guess, in terms of carbon storage, the whole biodiversity, making sure that we protect our grass and tree cover, and a lot of that's really difficult in times of extreme drought. So we've got the emissions and we've got the carbon storage. A lot of new technologies I mentioned is with the new things like the red seaweed, the Asparagopsis, and the 3-NOP. They've got a dramatically potential capability of reducing the emissions of methane from livestock. So we are now working with how to commercialise the production of this red Asparagopsis, and then how to utilise it into feed additives so it can be rolled out across our extensive system, put into molasses licks or maybe into pellets or something like that, so that this can be easily applied to our extensive rangeland system, and that will have a dramatic impact in reducing methane.
Wow, that is amazing progress. It's pretty amazing to see the environmental changes that have been happening. Obviously, in Australia, you are exposed to all of them, and you're doing your part. That's great to see. I guess it's about appreciation. The next question, and your customers. So since you launched these new measurements and the framework, what was the reaction of your customers? How did they go about like sustainable measured beef and lamb production? So how would they, describe the appreciation for these foods?
I'm on the steering group for the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, and we have a number of processes on there as well. And it's really interesting the feedback we're getting from them, that when they've got customers from around the world looking at our meat and comparing to other countries, why should they buy Australian? The fact that we have the framework that we can really document what we're doing in these areas. Animal welfare is a monstrous issue for consumers. The environmental impact is having a big impact on why people are choosing meat. And so it is actually very, very positive that they can see that we are commenting on what's happening right across Australia, not just the best producers. We're getting data across the whole of Australia so that when you're buying meat from us, this is what we're doing. So certainly from the customers, it's helping differentiate us. And if they've got customers that are discerning, they actually have proof about what they're doing. And equally, the Australian government has said as well, when they're out talking, there's enormous interest in what we're doing and how we're positioning there. So there too, I've had feedback. Anything else, Edwina?
Oh, not much I can really add to that, Jen. I think you've captured it. I guess clearly the trend is that the interest, a couple of decades ago was on eating quality and then on nutrition and making sure that we get all the necessary vitamin and minerals from our products. Clearly, the demand and interest is now shifting to greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, animal welfare. So that's becoming the increasingly shifting space, and interest and demand is shifting there. I think, as what Jen mentioned, the frameworks are tracking our progress and reporting back on our progress, and clearly demonstrating and transparently demonstrating what we're doing with the industry. I think we're really comfortable that we've pretty much got the best science and technology that we have at the moment. It's a matter of then making sure that that is able to be adopted within our extensive rangeland situation, and then progressing that. And we're at the start of that journey, but we're making some substantial progress.
Okay, great. There's another question which is very nicely coming into what you just said about adoption rates, namely, do all Australian beef producers or lamb producers are part of this framework? Is it like something that everybody can or has to adhere to? And how long does it take as a farmer to be really ingrained with it and have it intact, working?
So this is the things that we're reporting against are covering the whole industry, but the producers haven't necessarily signed up or being audited against it. But we're collecting data, so whether it's market data about the level of freedom of disease or the number of rejections. So we're looking at the systems that are underpinning it. But we are doing quite a lot to engage industry to be aware of what we're doing. And certainly Cattle Council, and I sit on Cattle Council's environment subgroup, we are actually looking at what's coming out there and where we think we should be improving. There's some areas we feel we would like to be better, and particularly with our goals, and we've set very ambitious goals to be world leaders in this, that we feel we need to improve. And so then we direct our research and development. So it's informing us and influencing then what's sent out to the producers. But the data we're collecting is data across the whole industry, if you know what I mean. But not every producer is getting audited against it or anything like that. This is, and that's where for some areas we've struggled to get data. For example, say soil quality and water, because each state, the Australian government does a lot in this space, and we have organisations that measure it, but each state reports in a different way. So we actually can't get data that represents national data. And so there is a lot of work getting accurate data, and we're trying to have it that is collected by someone else because that adds to the integrity of it. And so, yeah, so we're looking at a much bigger systems with how we're reporting. But we are looking at, how do we want producers to be engaged? What do they need to change? And what programs do we have? And MLA is looking at doubling the money and the effort that they do in extension, because we want to continue to lift the bar about how we're performing.
Okay. Do you believe in the future there will be a sort of a certificate, if you will, from MLA or a third party that can say this beef has come from this area and it's 99% carbon neutral? Do you believe this could come into force eventually in the next future?
I'm not sure, and Edwina might want to comment on that, but I know it's more the processors that have the relationships with the markets that are doing that. So I think it's the people that have the connection to the customers and brands. Already we have a number of brands that are doing some terrific things, and they have facilitated quite a lot of change with their farmers, because for farmers to supply them, they have to have the highest level of welfare, not just what's industry accepted, but a very, very highest. So it's really brands that have been driving that. It will be interesting around carbon, and we're probably maybe 3 or 4 years off having that. Who drives that? But I'd be surprised if it was industry endorsing it. I think it's probably, again, better that it's a supply chain and you've got that integrity in the supply chain. Edwina?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And I think, as you mentioned, I mean, Australian producers, to meet our export markets, have got very, very high levels of animal welfare guidelines at the moment that they've got to meet and support. And the strength of these frameworks is that they are connecting the value chain, so that if the markets are saying we want this product and we're willing to offer a premium, producers and the technology and science that MLA provides and supports can prove that that can be adopted by producers. If producers can adopt this technology and the market signals are there, that there is a positive competitive advantage to following this market, it's going to happen. It will happen. It will happen through market forces and through connecting the value chain. And that's the real strength of these frameworks, the transparency and the connection to that value chain.
Okay, great. I mean, we're almost, I just don't want to cut this short, but how about you tell us a tiny bit more, we have maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, about the companies that you brought this time around for the FHA Match series. Who are they, and which markets are you guys looking to export to in particular?
Sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
Oh, sorry. So we have a number of exhibitors under the MLA pavilion, which is one to have you guys on board. So I'm just wondering if you can talk to them, if they're all large scale producers, if there are some smaller ones, if they're focused on a particular area for exports. Is there anything that you like to highlight to the audience when reaching out to the exhibitors at the pavilion?
Well, I would imagine it's worth asking them where they're getting their meat from and what their system is and what systems are underpinning it. So I think it's worth connecting. It's really, as I showed on my map, Australia is a very large country, and we've got some incredible brands that are exporting, and they all have some unique points of difference. And I think it's really interesting exploring that. And I saw there was a question earlier, what makes Australian beef unique? I think that's a great question, as you asked, talk to the people you're sourcing, what's unique about this? For me, I think our integrity systems and our eating quality systems that we've had for so long, we're really producing to the highest standard. It is expensive, Australian meat, because we have such good integrity and we have good training, and we have to pay our workers quite high rates because of our high expectations. So we really are producing a quality product, but I think it's important to understand what underpins it.
I think our major meat processors are really driving this space too. Like there's a really strong connection between producer groups and their processors, and cementing and articulating their individual branded beef products for particular channels. That's a real strength of the Australian industry, that there is really strong alignment between producer groups and our processors into export markets. But again, a lot of this information and detail and that transparency is really available on our MLA website and the Beef Sustainability website as well.
Excellent. Great, wonderful. Then I would invite the audience to check out the MLA Pavilion, get in touch with you, Jenny and Edwina, to learn more about sustainable food production in Australia. And I really want to thank you for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you.
We'll be back soon with the next edition. Thanks.
Food is the great connector between the eaters and the feeders, and when you understand where your food's from is a reconnection with nature.
Our cattle are raised on grass, they eat good quality food all the year round, they have magnificent pasture, we provide shade and shelter, and we have a very specific program where they stay in their same social group throughout their time on the farm. People would like to know that.
The things that are important to us are also important to the consumers. Things like environmental management, animal welfare, biosecurity, and looking after the people and business on your operation as well. You have a real responsibility to really make sure that you're caring for your environment for future generations. So a lot of the work that we do and the considerations that we make are really looking at the long-term sustainability of our land and environment.
We want to produce really high quality food and fibre products here and do it to the best of our abilities and be satisfied ourselves. If we're experts in the field, we regard ourselves as professionals in what we do. So if we think we've done a good job, we hope that other people do too.
The big journey that we're on at present obviously is the whole carbon neutral beef program. And so although we've been working quietly in the background for a long time, that's our next journey here, is to ramp that up and to be able to underpin what we're doing with our carbon neutral beef with some real rigour.
At the end of the day, it is a business and we still have to make money off what we do. We have to look after our environment and our cattle for the next generation. Seeing your children working cattle and loving what they do, yeah, it's very rewarding.
We're a farming family, that's what we do, that's what I want to continue to do. For us to continue to be here, we have to be profitable, but at the same time, for us to be profitable, we have to look after our biggest resource, which is our land and our soil.
It's a unique business. We love being on the farm, we love the animals, that's what we do it. We love the environment we work in. I tell all my friends in the city, I've got the best office that anyone could imagine, really, when you get outside. Yeah, no, it's what we do, we love it.
Without our land being sustainable in an environmental sense, you know, we're not in business.
I think it's really important for young people to come into the industry and to keep striving for just improvement in ag, basically. I think the future is really exciting. We care where our food comes from, I care what my family eat. We do our very best to make sure that our land's going to produce it for generations to come.